This is Duke University.
Good afternoon. Once again, I'm Patrick Duddy. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies here at Duke. And spent about, well, I guess I spent nearly 30 years in Latin America. Remarkably, given that I'm chairing this afternoon's panel, though I tried on more than one occasion, I never served in either Canada or Mexico, but always south of there. The closest I came was being actually named as Consul General for Guadalajara at one point, and then at the last minute, someone came to me and said, actually, we'd rather you go somewhere else. And so they sent me off to another part of the hemisphere. But I have, part of my family is Canadian, so there are two countries in which I had always hoped to serve and never had the good fortune. Well, we're here this afternoon to talk a little bit about the government perspective. We'll start with Gilles, and we're doing that in part to respect a United Nations protocol that suggests we do things in alphabetical order by country. But also, after this morning's session, we wanted to give him an opportunity to respond to any number of the comments that were made earlier. Reminding him that everything he says is being recorded. We only have an hour for this panel, so I'll ask each of our speakers to speak for about 10 minutes or so that we have an opportunity at the end to take a few questions. Gilles? I think it's connected.
It's connected. Well, thank you, Patrick. Thank you to the organizer for this event. I'm very pleased and honored to be here. It's my first visit at Duke University, and it's a magnificent campus. I'm sure of that. Indeed, usually when you're a little bit later in the program, your job is easy because everybody has talked about the issue you wanted to talk about.
And the audience is asleep.
But I think I felt that I was put on the spot a few times this morning, so hopefully we'll be able to engage a dialogue on some of the points that were raised. I would say at the outset that I've been doing trade policy for about 25 years. My first exposure to trade policy was with Michael Hart on a technical group in the Canada-US FTA negotiation back in 1987, I think, or 88. Lost track of time, and then of course worked in the Uruguay round, NAFTA, and Doha, and many other bilateral agreements, including the recently concluded Canada-EU free trade agreements just prior to taking my assignment in Washington a year and a half ago. So trade policy is very much in my blood, and I love it, and therefore I will try to defend as much as I can the track record on trade policy that Canada has been following up for the past 25 years. In terms of the Canada-U.S. relationship, and to some extent it applies also to our relationship with Mexico, it is probably the most successful bilateral trade relationship that exists in the world. We're the largest trading partner to each other. We will probably remain like that, despite the fact that the Canadian economy is quite small in comparison. We are going to stay the biggest trading partner of the United States for at least another 10, 15, and perhaps 20 years, depending on the various growth rate elsewhere in the world. But what is also interesting to note is that Mexico is the number 2, and therefore for the United States, the NAFTA relationship is extremely important. Of course, the size of the U.S. economy makes it that in relative terms, it is a less open economy, less dependent on trade than either Canada or Mexico. But the reality is that we will remain the main export market of the United States for the foreseeable future. And even if you look just recently, since the end of the recession, and President Obama coming out saying that no, he wants to double the export of the United States within 5 years, probably won't achieve that objective. But where does the United States have the largest export growth? It is in Canada and Mexico. So we're the most dependable, reliable trading partners. And I think therefore, I think the broad message is that yes, we have some issue. Yes, we have trade irritants that I'm going to talk about, but the relationship is extremely strong and extremely vibrant. And since the NAFTA, that relationship has changed structurally, also quite significantly. We are far less a branch plan economy and now a lot more integrated in a great array of supply chains. So we like to say that now we don't necessarily trade with each other, but we make things together in North America. And that's the message that we'd like to foster. And in that context, the thematic of North America competitiveness is one that has attracted considerable attention over the past couple of years, I'd say. There is the process initiated between Secretary Guajardo from Mexico, Secretary Pritzker from the Department of Commerce, and Minister Fass, our Minister of International Trade. They started that last year to try to develop a work program on how to improve North America competitiveness. They're going to meet again next week in Toronto to pursue that dialogue. So there is a genuine effort to try to think about how do we make the necessary reform and alignment to help our competitiveness, both within that North America economic platform, but more so even in terms of how we can be more competitive vis-a-vis the rest of the world. There are, I think, two key initiatives. It was mentioned this morning. The Regulatory Cooperation Council issues to try to better align our regulatory practices, and the Beyond the Border initiatives that is aimed at reducing cost of transaction at the border. These initiatives are indeed difficult and take time, but they will matter in the long run. On the RCC front, we've been engaging quite significantly for the first time, I think, at regulators level to ensure that people, the regulators in the United States and regulators in Canada talk to each other on a regular basis, develop jointly their work program. They agree together on what are the regulations that they're going to work on over the next 3 to 5 years, and how do we ensure that through that process of new regulatory measures, we will achieve the degree of convergence or alignment that is necessary to maintain our competitiveness. There's plenty of examples. We have an integrated automobile industry, yet we have about 25 different standards applicable in any individual auto. So why is that? Is there a need for having different seat belt requirement, different side lights requirement, different even baby car seat requirements? There's tons of stuff that we can work together to further align our practices. Same thing in in the railroad industry. We have to have the same requirements for the transportation of dangerous material, the safety issue. So we need to but this is tough. This takes time. Regulators, not because they're not well-intentioned, but for regulators, health, safety, other, this was the basic of their way to operate, and trade is sort of an afterthought. So what we're trying to do is, by establishing these institutional mechanism whereby both regulators on both sides need to sit down and agree on a common work plan, and with the input of the private sector, that we will be able to reduce these kinds of the regulatory differences that impair our competitiveness. So a lot of progress. We had an event at the embassy 2 weeks ago. We had 400 people. 85 U.S. regulators, about the same number of Canadian regulators, and the rest were private stakeholders, business community, some NGOs, inputting into that process. So again, the result may not be necessarily tangible tomorrow, but over time, I think that is putting in train some institutional mechanism that will make a difference. And for the first time, we invited Mexico to join the discussion. We had, I think 5 or 6 representatives of Mexico observing the process, because they have their own bilateral process with the U.S., and therefore, through that, observership, we'll be able to, eventually move to a trilateral process. Likewise, on beyond the border, this is a tough one, because indeed, since 2001, unfortunately, the border has become a bit more difficult for obvious security reason. And so we need to, and I think for Canada it took a bit of time perhaps, but we now recognize fully that the security imperatives are there to stay, and we need to therefore to work with in not opposing trade facilitation versus security, but how we can move the two together. And that's the objective of Beyond the Border. We have made, I think, tremendous progress again there, but it will further is needed. We're about to complete the negotiation of a comprehensive pre-clearance agreement that will necessitate, some very difficult legislative changes in Canadian law. So already, you set the bar pretty high. The objective there is that if we can do things away from the border, like, trusted traveler, trusted trader, even some people are suggesting maybe we should do a trusted employer program to facilitate the movement of people associated with business. So if we can move these decisions away from the border, then perhaps we will be able to reduce border wait time and facilitate the trade. So that's a very important initiative. Using new technology also. Why is it that we cannot develop our application system jointly with the U.S. once they have done their single window initiative and everything is channeled into one application at the border? Why shouldn't there be full exchange of that data with Canadian Border Service Authority and vice versa, so that we expedite things at the border? So using of the new technology could help a great deal. But of course, infrastructure is a big issue at the border. The famous Detroit-Windsor Bridge is a big issue for Canada. It's a third of our trade that goes in through that particular corridor. So after many years of discussion, the government of Canada decided to take the lead and propose the idea of a public-private partnership model to build a new bridge. We will put the entire financing up front, and through the P3 process, recoup our investment over the life of the bridge, which is expected to be about 40 years or so. So that's a new model of using the private sector to improve the border infrastructure. Now, in terms of the sort of irritant, or, well, they're more than irritant, there are some point of tensions in our relationship, you know, that nobody can avoid the fact that, you know, we do have an issue on oil, the famous issue of the Keystone Pipeline. This is an important issue for the government of Canada. We feel that you know, this is the most secure way of transporting our oil, and we have an objective of bringing the oil to markets at a competitive price. So the reality is that despite the fact that, you know, we haven't succeeded in getting all the permits for the construction of the pipeline, Canadian oil continue to gain market share in the U.S. We're now accounting for about 33% of all the oil that the U.S. import, and this is by far, again, the first. We're by far the first supplier of oil to the U.S., way ahead of Saudi Arabia. No, the unfortunate part, perhaps, is that some of that oil is carried by rail, which runs more risk and is, in fact, from an environment standpoint, less environmentally friendly than pipeline. So that, and these are the points that, in fact, the State Department under Roberto leadership has concluded. So we're hopeful that when the political context is appropriate, that the pipeline will be approved. And then finally, a couple of other big irritants. The Buy America provision that Gary Hofbauer mentioned. In the last Congress, there were 165 Buy America proposals in Congress, and only one passed. But the signal that it sent to investors and to the you know, the business community in terms of how you structure your supply chain, that's a challenge. So we need to really contest these measures and make the point that, you know, our integrated supply chains are to the benefit of both countries. And in fact, Minister Fass has issued a press statement today on this very issue. For instance, there is a proposal that comes from the administration this time, not from Congress, but from the administration, proposing to increase the local content requirement on a rolling stock that include buses, subway, and rail cars. And given the integrated nature of our industry, we feel that that is very detrimental to Canada's interests. So there is that. We have a country of origin labeling on meat products also that is an issue affecting about $1 billion of exports. So these things, we need to work them out. I think they're indicative of a particular point in time, but they don't override the fundamental elements that Canada and U.S. Trade relationship remains the biggest and the most successful for both countries.
Thank you very much. There are any number of things which I expect we will want to come back to. Javier, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I was thinking that this was probably a classic case of triple jeopardy. First of all, because I am, for the record, not a trade specialist or a trade policy specialist at all. Second of all, this is one of the last panels of the day, so most of the important and sensible things have probably already been said. And third of all, of course, you've just had lunch. So I'm very aware of all these situations, so I'm not going to even, dare to repeat what has already been said. So I thought that, first of all, I'd try to put some context into how the NAFTA relationship and the trade relationship is seen locally here, for example, here in North Carolina, how it reflects here in North Carolina in terms of our relationship with this state from Mexico, and then make another reflection in terms of a larger picture that has to do a little bit with Mexican demographics, just to provoke maybe some reactions from the floor. On the first item, of course, Mexico is, like it's already been said by quite a few of my friends here, either the first or the second world trade partner of 30 of the United States. Is with either one or number two with 30 of the United States. In the case of North Carolina, we're number two. It's $7.2 billion worth of trade between North Carolina and Mexico. Actually, this is something I use in my job. Last year, we were number three. This year, we have become number two. We jumped China. Really? Number one is Canada, but we're going after you. But then, again, you know, it's a story that we keep using and repeating because it's very important. Over 180,000 jobs in North Carolina depend on trade with Mexico. And this is very important in terms of the job we do around here because, of course, in places like the south of the United States, usually a lot happens when people think about Mexico, we think we are a one-issue country. We only here to talk about immigration. Which, yeah, it is a critical issue for us, of course, and it will always be, and will keep on being. But we try constantly to talk about how we are not only a country where all these people who are here working and making a better life for themselves come from. We're a country that is a critical strategic ally of this community, this state, and this country, along with, of course, Canada. And it's a very powerful and important message. I must say that, of course, this very important relationship that happens between a state like North Carolina has happened because of the great relationship that has been going on between industries in North Carolina and some counterparts in Mexico that have, you know, created strategic links, strategic relationships. It's no small also issue that the state of North Carolina has had for more than 14 years. An office in Mexico City that is based in there to promote trade, along like quite a few other American states do, to have representations in Mexico City to promote and foster trade. Jean Davis is here, who had I think a great role in making this happen, although she's now in the dark side, but you still, you should be recognized for having, a critical role in making this happen. And we are very proud of that. A lot of people think that when we work with North Carolina, our role is just basically to promote, trade from Mexico to here or investment from here to there. And yeah, well, that's part of our job, but it's not only that. Whenever anyone comes here and tells us that they want to sell in Mexico, we also send them in the right direction, because it's a thing of not only selling, or it's not a zero-sum thing. It's a job of creating relationships, of creating connections, and once the connections are made, many other things happen. So there is a great story there, and that has been going on. And I would guess that you probably agree with me that to the larger public, it's a silent story. Most people don't know about it. And most people don't really recognize, for example, here in North Carolina, that their state is so closely and strategically linked to the global markets. They still want to think that that they are just a little bit of an island that don't rely on other countries and other people who are working in other markets overseas. The world is not like that, and that's not reality. And I mean, that happens in Mexico too, by the way, of course. And our role has to do with fostering this relationship that is there. It's been going on for a while. And how to make sure that people understand better that, like it's been very well said by my friends here, is that not only we're selling things to each other for a while, that's not what is going on. What's going on is that we are manufacturing together goods towards third markets in the world. And that's the real critical issue, and the real critical way that we should be looking at each other, not in terms of a zero-sum game of how many jobs were lost here or gained over there, or how much did you sell me and how much did I buy from you. Is how we are, and we have been able to develop a strategic alliance as partners, and how are we able to position ourselves towards the future, towards other markets, other regions in the world, which, by the way, are doing it as we speak. I mean, in Europe, in South America, in Mercosur, in some areas in the Pacific, they do conceive themselves as regional partners and as regions that are competing in the global markets. And as a lot of you guys here have said it in a much more articulate way than I have, we in North America are lacking in being able to create a better awareness and concept of North America as a region. It happens in Mexico, happens here, and I guess it happens in Canada. And that's probably some of our greatest challenges that we have before us. On the second element I wanted to share with you, when couldn't stop thinking when you were showing looking at all of the graphs and all the numbers and the trade, etc., and some of these provocative slides that we saw before the launch on what we would look like in 2050. There is a critical element also that has to do with demographics. Roberto Jacobson did mention that for at least for the past couple of years, yes, we, in terms of migration, we are in a zero sum. Net migration between Mexico and the United States appears to have stopped, which is, that raises a lot of eyebrows when I speak about that.
It's big news, but it's not known.
Exactly. It is big news because this is something that has not happened in more than 80 years since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, there are demographers here. There are, genius economists here on the table who will probably come out with a lot of, elements of discussion or hypotheses on what's behind this. We could go around the issue of course, the American economy. Is it creating the jobs? So it's not attracting workers like it used to in the 90s. But there is also very, structural elements behind all of this too. And one of them has to do with demographics in Mexico. The demographics in Mexico are changing before our eyes. Our country, Mexico, will stop growing as a country, as a nation, in the next decade, which means that, of course, less young people in the workforce, which means that probably within, probably my lifetime, I don't know about a lot of you, but at least in my lifetime, we will probably never see again migration flows coming back from Mexico to the United States like the ones we saw in the 80s and 90s. So that changes a lot, and that changes many things, and that creates a scenario and a paradigm that will have to be considered by policymakers, not only in Mexico but in North America, because some of the supply of labor force that Mexico has been providing to the United States for the past couple of decades is going to stop, and it is not inconceivable to think that, again, perhaps within my lifetime, Mexico and the United States will start competing for workforce, for workers in the world market, yes. And that, if you think about that in the context of North America, NAFTA, et cetera, that creates a lot of questions and a lot of things that we should probably be starting to talk about as a region, as partners in the global markets. I don't have the answers now. I'm just making the questions and trying to provoke. I'll stop here, and thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much again.
That was terrific. Thank you very much. And I think we're going to have a PowerPoint from you, Walter?
I think so.
Oh, but you're going to use
Unless you have one.
No, not me. All right.
I just wanted to stand up there. That's
All right. Well, standing up is permitted.
As long as I don't have to stand in the corner.
Yeah.
Do that with me. Good afternoon. For those of you we joined up in Atlanta last week, I apologize because you're going to hear a lot of this again, but at least you know it's kind of what I do believe. Before I get started, Roberta this morning talked about the solid partnership. Mexico and Canada were solid partners, was her term, for the United States. And in this regard, what I want to do, and I do this every opportunity I get when I'm with Canadian and Mexican colleagues, I like to remind the audience that these are the best neighbors anybody could have. We've got a 5,000-mile border with Canada, a 2,000-mile border with Mexico. Yes, it has its problems, But when we're in trouble, it's really nice to know, you get comfort from knowing who your neighbors are. And just 2 examples I'll give you, and then I'll get down to the point of the talk. 9/11 comes along, and of course we do what we do best, which is we put our head inside, like a turtle, and take our head inside. Oops, we left all the airplanes up there. So where do they land? Well, they land in Canada. And the Canadians take in our aircraft, and the Canadians take in our citizens, and we're extremely thankful for that. We have a Hurricane Katrina down on the Gulf Coast. A lot of the infrastructure is destroyed, food shortages, water shortages. Who's there to help us out? The Mexicans are right there to help us out. In times of disasters along the border, our public utility vehicles go back and forth. So I just want to throw that out there. I appreciate the neighborliness and the friendship that we've got with both of these countries. Going forward, a lot has been said already. We've talked about what the problems are, so forth. I'd like to talk to you about something that I firmly believe in, and I'm a trade guy, but my real passion falls in the area of education. And this is education broadly, very broadly defined. I mean, I could go on for hours about the abysmal state of K through 12 throughout Latin America. It stinks. And they use the same curriculum and textbooks and so forth that came over with Columbus. Well, as I recall, that's hundreds of years ago, and it doesn't really work that well today. A lot of basic issues that need to be addressed in the area of education: curriculum development, pay for teachers, technology. Now, some countries in the hemisphere are doing something with it, but there's not enough being done. And this applies to the entire region. You got to give the young boys and girls the tools that they need, the computers that they need. So that's one. 2 is the area which I also include as education is capacity building. And you've heard a lot about that today. Work in Reg Co-op as an example. Standards, customs, patent protection. If you want to innovate, damn it, you really need some patent protection out there. But it's an educational process. It's getting people aware of this, to understand it, as opposed to the fact that, as a lot of them will tell you, the pharmaceutical companies are villains. They're vultures up there, making, selling needed medications at extremely high prices, forgetting, of course, the cost that goes into to innovating the product and going through testing through FDA and so forth, and actually getting it out in the market. Everybody had a standards or regulatory story to tell today. My favorite one was a former Secretary of Commerce, Gilles Gauthier, was going through his Senate hearings, and I think this was a setup question. But anyway, the senator asked, "Do you know anything about standards?" Well, this gentleman had been the CEO of Kellogg's. And he said, "Standards? I know all about standards. When I'm making those cornflakes in Dearborn, Michigan, I got to shut down my production line if I'm going to run off product for the Canadian market." Well, this is kind of silly. I mean, you would think that all the countries on the planet, the Canadians and the gringos could get together and, come up to mutually accepted standards. But clearly this is we haven't gotten to that point yet, but we are working on getting that done. But we're spending a lot of time on capacity building, trying to improve the efficiency of customs and so forth. The truth of the matter is, when you look at trade, very little has changed in the basic precepts from the time that the Phoenicians were going up and down the Mediterranean, going from Tyre to Sidon and places like that. What you needed is a quality product, you needed the quantity, and you had to have the delivery time, which I guess in those days wasn't really great. But nonetheless, I mean, these are the basic factors. Today, what's changed is technology and the communications and so forth. But the basic tenets are there. It's quality product, quantity, and delivery time. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on. Other that's been bandied about a lot this morning is infrastructure development. Couldn't agree more on that. The concept of public-private partnerships to try to get some of this done. You can't just, the days of relying strictly on the federal governments are gone. We simply don't have the money to do that. So we got to find alternatives to funding of projects. And we get bogged down in some silly examples. Now, Roberta had a couple of examples of some changes and improvements that had been made. But I'll just take another example of where no progress has been made, and that is in the Brownsville-Matamoros area on something called the West Rail Bypass. And the West Rail Bypass drives me crazy. It will be, if ever completed, the first new railroad crossing between the U.S. and Mexico in over 100 years. Yeah, that's quite a time to be waiting for the train. So, it's over silly, I will call silly, disputes at local levels, not even the feds at this point, on moving some X-ray equipment from an old facility to a new facility. Who's going to pay for it? Well, how much is it? It isn't very much money. It's not even a rounding error, but who the hell's going to pay for this? So now we're holding up this. And so you've got this bridge, it's railroad bridge, trestles there, everything's there. You can walk across it, only halfway across it, however, because there's a chain link fence up that says, no, this bridge isn't open for business. Just because we haven't been able to come up with a little bit of money to move some equipment from point A to point B. So these are some of the things that we're trying to get resolved through things like the high-level economic dialogue, which have been discussed earlier today, so I won't go through that. The next thing, which is educational in nature, and this has been referred to a lot today, is the whole issue of outreach, building a constituency for trade with, in our case, with Canada and Mexico. So I was coming down the airplane, I was looking at the magazine back of the seat in front of me. You know, there was an ad for Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Okay, so besides wanting to go to Vegas, it got me thinking that what happens at our borders doesn't stay at our borders. When there's a slowdown on either border, it ripples through our entire economy. Product that you need for the automobile industry, for the chemical industry, let me just go on and on, electronics industry. You can't slow the stuff down at the border. And I think the point's been made several times, you know, about the silence on NAFTA. Excuse me, Patrick, I may take more than my little 10 minutes, 12 or 13. So in the run-up to the CAFTA vote, the Central America Free Trade Agreement vote, I was listening to Lou Dobbs one night. Now, Lou Dobbs was the guy he was on CNN at the time, that you listened to. I listened to him at the end of the day when I was really tired and I was driving home and I needed to get the blood flowing again. And so Lou Dobbs says, well, the subject for tonight's conversation is going to be NAFTA and CAFTA. And joining us tonight, we've got, I forget his name, Joe, Sam, whatever, from one of the labor organizations. And he says, so, Sam, what can you tell me about NAFTA? Lou, it's been an abject failure. Whoa. What can you tell me about CAFTA? Well, Lou, it's been an abject failure. It's going to be an abject failure, too. Whoa. We go to commercial break. We come back, and Sam's gone. So now you've got two statements that have been made that are, you know, I'd like to hear, you know, what the arguments are, but there are no arguments. Now we're on to some other subject, absolutely, totally unrelated to trade. So I think that goes to this issue of he has a pulpit, you know, and he's willing to go out there and have these inane discussions. The other thing to keep in mind is that NAFTA, we're celebrating NAFTA at 20. So when NAFTA went through the U.S. Congress, it was approved, the House of Representatives, by one vote. It was pretty contentious. 10 years later, the Central America Agreement comes through, and it gets approved by 2 votes. So you can be optimistic and say 100% improvement. Or you can probably be a little more realistic and say, damn it, in 10 years we got 1 vote because we don't go out and talk about it. NAFTA at 20, you're doing a program here. How many programs has the federal government done? We don't do much at NAFTA 20.
We'd like to know about that. You're in the federal government, we've heard.
Oh, and I got bashed pretty well today for being a bureaucrat too. Thank you. But we've got to. We don't get the message out. So we have designed something called the Heartland Tour. Now, the heartland obviously being the middle of the United States, where it's been pointed out every state either has Mexico or Canada as the #1 or #2 trading partner. But the folks there don't realize that. I don't think the folks in New Hampshire realized that in 2012, Mexico was their largest export market. Who'd have thunk it, you know? In New Hampshire, Mexico, it's just not a natural tie. So I came up with this idea of, well, let's go to Iowa. Let's go to Nebraska. Let's go to South Dakota. Let's go to Montana in the summertime. So, but not just to go out there. We have this thing that we do in Washington, which is, hey, I'm going to Des Moines, and I'm going to catch that plane at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to deliver my speech at 10:30. At 11, I'll be back at the airport, and I'll be home by 2 o'clock. You know, we go for that Guinness Book of World Records. How quickly can you get there, do your job, and come home? So we said, no, we're not taking advantage of what it is we're doing. If you're going to Des Moines, you go out, of course you're going to give your speech, but you got to go out and talk to other groups while you're out there. You got to do the editorial board at the Des Moines Register and let them know what's going on. You got to go on Good Morning Des Moines and give that, that speech early in the morning so people begin to understand the importance of it. And you don't go out just as a guy from Washington, D.C., but you're accompanied by somebody from the Canadian government, somebody from the Mexican government. We've done this. We did this. Gilles was out with this. And we've managed to engage the Southern Border Caucus. So these are the members of Congress from basically Brownsville down over to San Diego, and get one of them to accompany us and invite the representative from whatever city we happen to be in. So you've got the congressional, we're kind of forcing congressional interest to get them to focus on what we're doing. So these are some of the things that we're trying to do. Again, in the education field, and this was just referred to, we need to do a better job of promoting joint research and innovation. And not just innovation, but how do you commercialize that innovation? We need to get our national laboratories involved. We need to get, our universities involved. And I think there's an appetite within the U.S. academic community for this. I think there's probably a little more reluctance on the national lab side, on some of them. And there's some security issues involved in that, I understand that. But there are an awful lot of instances where that's not the case. So why aren't we, yes, we are producing things together. Why aren't we producing higher tech things together, state of the art? In this regard, I'd like to give you a couple of examples of how these things could possibly work. Well, one of these, and thanks to Dr. Gireffi, who I got to tell you, all of this is, when I started talking about competitiveness and innovation, I couldn't spell either word. And so, fortunately, Dr. Gireffi's daughter works in our office, and she said, call my dad, he knows everything. And damn it, she was right. But one of the things that we want to do, we always get beat up on things like textiles. Everybody likes to hammer in the United States on the fact that they can't sell more cotton men's undershirts in the United States. So with Gary's help, we brought up some Latin Americans on a couple of occasions, and we took them to NC State. Now, the NC State has probably the best textile institute in the world, right? So they can see where that industry is going. What's the future of that industry? What are the new fibers that are coming out? How am I going to be able to change the interior of my car from red to black, if that's what I want? Or the suit, from whatever color it is, got lousy vision, dark to light. It's going to heat me. It's going to keep me cool. And you're worried about men's white cotton T-shirts? Come on, give me a break. So I think we're trying to open people's eyes. But one thing that I find throughout the Western Hemisphere is the lack of the vision thing. We're very good at focusing on the problems today. But what are the problems that are coming down the road? What do I have to prepare myself today for what's coming down the road in 5, 10, 15 years? And a number of years ago, we ran a e-fellowship program. So we brought some people from mid-level managers from internet companies up to the United States, and they did a week in Washington, then they did a 5-week internship with a U.S. company. There was a gentleman who came up from Mexico City, had a small little software company. Don't write me notes, So I said, how did it go for you? He'd been out at Microsoft, and he says, it was incredible. When I walk down the hall in my building in Mexico City, somebody will say, oye, Jose, tengo un problema hoy. Jose, I got a problem today. Help me solve it. He said, no, not out at Microsoft. They said, I'm going to have a problem in 10 years. Help me solve it today. It's a whole different way of looking at the world, and I think we need to push that. I am getting down there. I'm getting down there. Okay. We did establish the North American Competitiveness and Innovation Conference held last year, November of last year in San Diego. It's going to be held again this year in Toronto, Canada. And it was very interesting because everybody says, yeah, you know, we're entrepreneurial. We can develop new product. We're innovative. But Minister Fast of Canada said, we can innovate with anybody in the world. We can't take it to market. We're not good at commercializing product. So I think that is something we need to take a look at also. I mean, it's nice to have the ideas. It's nice to build those ideas. And then what? You've got to be able to get them to market. And that's what we are particularly good at in this country. Okay, what else do I have to... Because I am running out of time here. One other example of something we've done, and it is something we call the America's Competitiveness Exchange. And this happened in March and April of this year. We brought up a number, we were going to start out doing this just on Mexico, and we were going to invite 7 or 8 Mexican firms up to the southeast of the United States. Well, by the end, we had 50 people, because word gets out, oh, you're doing this, we'd like to join you. And we went to places that I will tell, well, we started off in Greenville, South Carolina, and that was fine. I'd heard of Greenville. I could find that on a map. And, you know, you go to see the BMW plant that manufactures all the SUVs that are sold, BMW SUVs that are sold in the world, the GE turbine production. And we had a visit from the students from the A.J. Wittenberg Elementary School for Engineering. Now, did this open people's eyes? So now you've got a damn first grader he's running a physics experiment. So this isn't just like, you know, put this in slot A, this in slot B. He explains the phenomenon that you're looking at and the science behind it. Well, this was a model that really captured the imagination of the folks that were traveling with us. We then went to Conover, North Carolina, known by our Latin American friends as Conover. So we went to Conover. That one, I had to Google Conover, North Carolina. It's under 10,000 folks that live in Conover. Old, I guess, ag, and some textiles there. What are they manufacturing today? Today they are manufacturing medical devices, among other things. These folks, our colleagues from Latin America went in, everybody walked out with a product of 3D printing. Now, people had heard of 3D printing, but you know, to them it was basically still science fiction. You know, and just, again, to open people's eyes, to capture their imaginations, hopefully to capture the imaginations of government officials to say, God damn it, we got to put something in place that's going to allow us to be able to compete in the world that's coming down the road. So, I guess I've probably gone on too long, huh? The last thing I wanted to mention is a lot that needs to be done takes time. And I've been at the Commerce Department for decades and decades and decades. And I can remember when I first started working there, there were 2 things that we never talked about. One was imports. That was a really bad word. That was worse than the 4-letter words. I mean, you know, it was a really bad word. Imports are killing us. And we never talked about foreign investment in the United States. They're going to displace U.S. workers. Now, it's several decades later, now we have a program called Select USA. Y'all come, you hear? You know, bring your money, invest in our country, can create jobs in our economy, help grow our economy. So some of my point in all of this, and we also understand the value of imports, of supply chain, things of that nature that we need to pay attention to. So some of the things that have been discussed here today, I think are fascinating, and some of them can probably be taken care of in relatively short time. Some of them take a long time, but Even though the bureaucrats took a little bit of a beating today, I'll just assume it was in good humor. We are working on these things. It's just, there's so much to do. And, you know, the playing field is just so wide. So we pick and choose what we, you know, to a degree, what we can work on. I'll just say one thing. At the Commerce Department, the U.S. Trade Representative negotiates the agreements. That's their job. Ours is to support those negotiations and then to try to turn the product of those negotiations into business for U.S. companies. We've got a lot of tools at our command. When you think of commerce, you generally just think about trade. Yeah, that's what commerce is, after all. But we have 12 bureaus, and that's just one of them, and it's a small part of our budget, and it's a very small part of our personnel resources. We've got roughly 40,000 people, and that's probably about 2,500 people. Interestingly enough, and what I'm trying to get the department to do is to recognize that we have a pretty talented group of people. We have 6 Nobel Prize winners on staff. Who would have thunk it? And an astronaut. So are we using these people? Are we using the talents that they've got and the connections that they've got? So just that's something else that we're trying to bring into the fold. Anyway, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
I think we have about 10 minutes. No, we're going to steal 10 minutes from the next panel. We have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. Yes, Fernando.
A small question in relation to standard norms and competitiveness. I am an engineer, and this has been discussed for a long period of time. What is happening with the adoption of the metric system in the US, which impacts competitiveness? And I've seen that firsthand. I mean, this is, you know, if you're going to be importing machinery, building materials, if they are not in the metric system, you are at a disadvantage.
I don't mean to give you a flip answer on this, but I probably will. It's an idea whose time hasn't quite arrived yet. We're not quite ready for that one in the United States. And frankly, while I'm sure it probably is being talked about in some offices and probably maybe even in our own National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's not one that we are actively, I can tell you for the rest of us, actively pursuing at all. And, you know, when you take, where were we, you know, I don't know, 20 years ago, when, I forget how long ago it was when this came up, we already had our highway signs in both miles per hour and kilometers per hour y todo eso, no? But it's disappeared. It's just not a... I'm sorry?
In Maine, some of them are for the Quebecers.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's for the benefit of the Canadians.
But
they always get their way.
The irony there is that Canada was reluctant to move to the metric system, and we were convinced by the United States to do the conversion, and then they decided otherwise. So. So it's too bad that Gary Bauer had left, because when he talked about the US, harmonization to U.S. standard, we thought we were hoping to do that 30 years ago.
Just remember, when somebody holds the door open for you, they're expecting something. Yeah, I know.
Right. Okay. Another question?
Bertrand Guillotin, Fuqua School of Business. I just wanted to go back to the medical device mentioned earlier and healthcare in general. Are there initiatives among the 3 countries to especially help the U.S. healthcare system be a little bit more affordable? Are there initiatives in terms of joint research, trade, anything?
The only thing I could say there is that there are many universities that have partnership between Canada and the United States. There's including one with Johns Hopkins University, because, you know, this is part of my territory in the Washington area, so I've been a bit involved into helping that cooperation agreement between University of British Columbia and Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. It's more in the area of public health policy as opposed to research. But this is an area, like Walter said, that maybe there's a need for more framework cooperation agreements in the area of science and technology, and and maybe healthcare could be a good candidate. But
What was the specific question? I didn't.
whether there are cooperation agreements in the healthcare.
Oh, in healthcare,
segment.
I don't think that we've actually focused in on, well, that's not quite true. We have been focusing at the, let's say, the university level, postgraduate level, on the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. So arguably that would certainly fall in that. And it's pretty broad because we're also trying at the same time to introduce the concept of community colleges in Latin America, of which are very damn few. You can count them on one hand and probably about 3 fingers of how many there are throughout the hemisphere. So community colleges, and I think particularly for the U.S. and Mexico, have a benefit in that they are very agile in being able to change their academic program, their curriculums, to meet an immediate need. And so we're trying to foster that idea. And in fact, our commercial service, we got a representative here, actually 2, you and your intern friend. We have an educational program that's going to Central America, with community colleges next, I think in the first quarter of next year, something like that. So, but it is, we are looking at that, but it's in focusing on those 4 disciplines.
I think I should add that we have programs in place in collaboration, for example, here in the United States with the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, for example, to promote better awareness and understanding about the immigrant, the Latinos, Hispanics in the United States about the Affordable Care Act and the process and of course, the probable access for many of those immigrants to community clinics in the United States, preventive health, all of that. So we work with them, with our consulates all over the United States to create better awareness and information.
Yeah. And we've also, I know that the Mexican government and our government has been working on, with the concern over pandemics, and this goes back a number of years with protocols already in place. So, you know, it's like CDC, and you can argue whether or not that's the best contact you could have today, but nonetheless, but going back to them and the public health services, just to be sure that, you know, when something pops up, we can do the best to stop it.
I'm going to presume to jump in here with a question for at least 2 of you, but perhaps all 3 of you. And we only have a couple of minutes, but I was wondering first, Walter, if you can give us a sense of the degree to which you think the political environment surrounding the public debate on free trade impedes or retards your efforts to either implement or deepen the trade relationships that we have. And also, though one sees somewhat less of it from Canada, there have always been at least some political figures in Mexico who have been very skeptical of the benefits of NAFTA, thinking of AMLO in particular. And I was wondering if you could also speak to the issue of whether it is politically problematical to work to deepen the relationship. And Gilles, if you could touch on the same with Canada.
Okay. I think from a couple of examples that I gave during my remarks, I think it's pretty clear that the free trade, we'll call it what you want, you know, is not a concept that everybody has embraced. We get, I've had a lot of problems with a couple members of my staff and the phone calls that they've gotten from folks outside of Washington saying, I know who you are, I know where you live, and I'm going to get you. You are a traitor to your country. Serious enough to have to turn these over to the FBI. Okay, so, I mean, a lot of this, I think, we bring on ourselves, but we do not do a good enough job of going out and talking about the value of free trade, trying to debunk, and there are some real concerns, don't get me wrong, but where there are misunderstandings, people are misinterpreting what's happening, we ought to be out there taking those on, and there's a reluctance to do
Telling
that,
the story.
to telling the story, and it's a good story to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, as Roberta was talking about, you know, she's one person doing the job of, you know, 5 others, and she's got most of the trade or most of the exports. I mean, that's This is where the business is happening.
That's true.
It is true, and it's where the business is happening.
Pretty much, of course, yes. I always like to say when I talk about these sort of things with a lot of people here, you have your loonies, we have ours too. And yeah, of course, but and to be more serious, I think it basically reflects, of course, what's been discussed this morning, that, of course, the benefits of open trade, the benefits of opening the economy, liberalization or globalization, whatever you want to call it, trickles down slowly, and probably some sectors of the economy of the society have made sacrifices to adapt to new realities. And of course, in the case of Mexico, there are certain sectors of the population of the economy who have not been, benefited by this process. Actually, they have, suffered by it, especially, for example, one of the most common stereotypes is, of course, the Mexican rural area, the agricultural area. So that creates a lot of fertile ground for using NAFTA as a punching bag, as a piñata, and it's very sexy, it's very productive. It scores points, and as long as it scores points, it will be there.
It will be repeated.
It will be repeated. And again, yes, of course, the hard part is to be more successful, to provide the information of the global effects of that. Of course, yes, there are some parts of the economy that have suffered, but as a large, the Mexican economy has benefited greatly. It has been very well illustrated throughout this morning. Yeah. Of course, when it's a Mexican government official saying it, we don't have probably as much credibility when we say it. We need someone else to be saying this sort of story. But it's part of we see it as part of a natural process. It will still be a challenge as long as it is politically, attractive for certain people to do it. And the thing is to try to make sure that the discussion is made on rational terms and on real numbers and on our concrete issues, and not myths and things that are, made up under somebody's mind.
Well, in Canada, I think, as it was mentioned earlier, I think today, there is a very broad public support for open trade and for trade agreements. Even the last agreement that we just finalized with the European Union, all three political parties at the federal level were supportive of it. So there is a broad public support. The polls indicate around 75 to 80% support for free trade. Maybe where things start to change is if you want to go further and you talk about common institution where there would be a fear of the loss of sovereignty. Then
I remember the cultural debate. And the great novelist Robertson Davies was terribly worried, as I recall, about the loss of Canada's cultural identity.
Yeah, but you see, people now are able to draw the line between trade, open trade, and the loss of sovereignty if you were to move to a common market or a EU type of arrangement. I don't think that would be probably too ambitious at this point. And in fact, if you haven't had a chance yet to read the recent report of the Council on Foreign Relations, I think they put it up front quite nicely in terms of how there are things that can be done while preserving the sovereignty and the sovereignty appetite that still exists very much so in Canada or Mexico and the United States, of course. So there are many initiatives that can be taken to strengthen our common economic space while preserving the integrity of our sovereignty from a pure political standpoint.
Thanks. And we'll 2 points, and then we'll wrap it up for the next panel. Thanks.
Okay. The issue of sovereignty, I think most people understand that we are not getting rid of foregoing the U.S. sovereignty. But there is a group out there that doesn't believe that. Now, we get phone calls, too, from people and letters saying, not only are you giving away sovereignty, now we got a common currency. You guys already have it designed. It's called the Amero. Whoa, well, you know, I mean, that's like news to us. You know, our colleagues in Treasury, they're not real good on the interagency sharing of information.
Never were.
Never were. The other thing is, I think when we're talking, I mean, free trade agreements are a tool for economic development, right? I mean, if we can agree on that. And that's a federal initiative or product. But it seems to me, too, it's not up to the federal government to lead economic development. This needs to be done at the local level. This is where the mayors play a role. This is where the universities play. This is where the local businesses play. And, you know, so we've created the framework, and within that framework, you've got, you know, all these other folks can come in and do their work. Okay, I mean, that's my view. But then we need to take advantage of them. We've got a constituency there that we're not using. And I think that's, and it's not all along the border. I mean, some of this is, you know, well interior in the United States. And I think we need to identify our constituency and begin to develop, you know, work with them.
This was terrific. Thank you all very, very much.